Right. I think that's clear then. As I said, a very warm welcome. My name is Yolande Hendler. I'm the General Secretary at HIC. This is our second session of the co-learning and advocacy spaces. Today we will be speaking about human rights systems, which we are very excited about, but I won't say too much on that as our facilitators have prepared a more detailed introduction for you. What I perhaps would like to say is that I know we have quite a few participants who are joining us for the first time today, and so a particularly warm welcome to you. You may be familiar that we also have a Google Classroom space running concurrently, where you can catch up on the materials and the recording of the previous session. If you haven't been able to link up to the Google Classroom space yet, please let us know in the chat as well, and the team will connect with you and help you to do so. What I would just briefly like to share before we start is perhaps just a brief recap of why HIC is convening these co-learning and advocacy spaces. We shared last week that what is at the heart is this concept and this value of building social force, and that for HIC, building social force is very much about connecting cross-regionally, learning together, but then also strategizing together and pursuing advocacy actions. And so this particular co-learning space on multi-level advocacy is very much at the heart of one of the core paths that HIC practices. I would also like to introduce you to the three facilitators who have been preparing this co-learning space and been putting together the program over the last many months. They are HIC members, and what is very much also part of the co-learning space is that it is run, designed, and conceptualized by HIC members with the support of the HIC team, but it is very much taking into account what your priorities are, what the priorities are that you've been sharing with us at the last General Assemblies. And so I would like to introduce you to Hala Murad. Perhaps I could just briefly ask you to wave. Hala is from Jordan, and you will be hearing more from her. And then Henrique Frota, who is based in Brazil. And then, of course, Emmanuel Chungu, who is based in Zambia. And so just as much as our facilitators are from 3 different regions in the world, you will see that as participants, we have a very varied group of people here as well, from more than 3 regions in the world. And the background team in HIC has a very cross-regional nature as well. So I just want to welcome you once again to this cross-regional time of building social force together. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Henrique, who will be sharing a brief recap with us of the content that we spoke about in the last session.
Thank you so much, Yolande. I will speak in Spanish, and I hope that the translation works for everyone. Muchas gracias, Yolande.
Thank you very much, Yolande. Good morning, evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. It's a great pleasure to see you once again in the second session of this pedagogical process in the co-learning space on political advocacy at different levels, the multi-level advocacy. My role today will be only to speak about the things that happened during the first session last Wednesday. If you attended that meeting, or if you were able to watch the recordings, which are available in all of the languages in the Google Classroom, you might have seen that the subject of the first meeting was understanding political advocacy, understanding what it is about. The objectives of that first session were to try and construct a shared understanding amongst ourselves of what the definition, the concepts, or the basic ideas should be around advocacy matters. We had a wonderful opportunity to listen to two guests. First, we listened to Margaret Umura from the Zero Eviction campaign in Brazil. And then Margaret spoke about the situation of evictions, forced evictions in Brazil that were worsened by the pandemic. Then she also spoke about the methodologies and the political advocacy processes that a wide group of popular movements and organizations in Brazil use after this zero eviction campaign so as to be able to achieve changes in the national legislation and to acquire recommendations from the courts or from judiciary bodies on the matter of evictions. She spoke about methodologies of the systematization of data in combination with public communication campaigns. We also had the chance to listen to Laura Hostin from South Africa. She belongs to an organization called SERI. It is a group that defends social and economic rights in Africa. Lauren spoke about a very interesting perspective, a very complex and holistic perspective on the possible and multiple possibilities of how to do advocacy using the media, or perhaps working with the grassroots, with the communities, with the lands. So we had a very rich discussion from her perspectives. So I encourage you to watch the first session if you haven't on Google Classroom. And finally, once again, I would like to speak of a very interesting exercise we had, because before the first session, we asked the participants to collaborate by answering a question about their own understanding of advocacy. And during the first part of the session, we systematized the common terms from your own definitions. So this is how we realize that advocacy has to be with techniques, methodologies, with an activity that requires planning, so as for us to be able to be effective. Advocacy is also related to the idea of having an influence, an impact on the decisions, and to promote changes within the decision-making arenas, those places in which important things are being discussed from the national, international, local perspectives to influence on public policies, and also to lobby in favor of certain laws in the countries or international conventions, to have an influence in all of those areas. So according to your responses, your answers, we realize that advocacy is also related to the perspective of defending rights. So perhaps we didn't discuss this so much during the first session, but I bring it to the table now. Within a complex ecosystem, there are multiple stakeholders, actors doing political advocacy, people who are not only using human rights approaches, but there are also private corporations or interest groups, right-wing organizations doing their own lobbying. So advocacy is not something that is only reserved to popular movements or human rights defenders. There are other collectives, groups, people who have very different objectives, who are also there doing the same thing, trying to influence political decisions based on their own interests, many times private interests. And so that's something that should be considered so as not to romanticize the advocacy term, thinking that all advocacy is good or virtuous, or that they're all defending groups. And with this, I would like to ask my dear colleague and co-facilitator of this space, Hannah Moran, to help us guide the discussion. Hannah is going to be the facilitator today, and she will be explaining the work objectives for today, and she will introduce our guests. So Hannah, it's a pleasure to have you here. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Enrique, for this excellent presentation. Thank you. We welcome you again. We are so happy that you are with us today on the second day. Welcome to those who joined us today during this session, which will be for 2 hours. I promise you it will be exciting and interesting, because we will discuss a topic that my colleague Enrique has introduced, and it is at the core of the advocacy processes that we perform. Advocacy should not raise awareness about one aspect or one side. It is also to achieve clear objectives on issues that we believe in, and they also have to do with a direct right of human rights at the Habitat International Coalition that mainly focused on the importance of the right to land, the right to housing, justice and equality, gender justice and equality, and we focus also more on issues having to do with human rights directly. These rights that we cannot address our programs, projects, without having these rights at the forefront, and try to have them gather us according to our national objectives in our countries or in our different regions, MENA region, Africa, and in also the South, the global South. It is a work built on the regional idea that gathers everyone within one crucible. And on the international level, we can also move to talk about that we work towards this real level, which is pushing the realization of rights worldwide through an agenda. This agenda, the UN, since its inception, had a clear agenda and issued a number of instruments, mechanisms, agreements, covenants, and protocols, that among which some are obligatory, which countries perform directly to guarantee these rights for all people, or these agreements could be non-obligatory, such as the development goals, sustainable development goals, which do not have an obliging mechanism, but they are awareness-raising mechanisms. What we will do today really has to do directly to these general frameworks that talk about human rights approaches to deal with advocacy, multi-level advocacy. And as I told you, we can use these frameworks, the obliging and non-obliging, within the national, regional, and the international frameworks, in order not to take too long and in order to listen more. We will have two speakers who are experts in this field, multi-level advocacy through the human rights approach, and to tell us what advocacy based on human rights and how this in mechanism on the international level can serve advocacy and the programs that it depends on. I will give the microphone now to our colleague Sylvia. Where are you, Sylvia? Sylvia will introduce and coordinate the first session with Christian Cortes. I give you the floor.
Thank you very much,
جزيلا.
Hala.
هلا من الأردن. سنذهب إلى المكسيك. سأتحدث
Good morning, good
باللغة.
evening, good night, wherever you are in the world. I have the great honor and pleasure to introduce Christian Cortes very quickly. Christian, he is a human rights official at the High Commissioner's Office of the United Nations for the Defense of Human Rights in Geneva. He has also worked in New York, and currently he's a consultant in terms of gender and women's rights at the UN offices in New York. He has broad experience as an academician. He has written a very important amount of texts that have been paramount for Latin America in the understanding of social rights. And he's also been a consultant of a series of other international organizations that are connected to the UN system. Christian has 25 minutes to speak about the importance of the human rights approach to take advantage of the international and regional systems that defend human rights. And afterwards, we will have a 15-minute Q&A session, and then Christian will have to run because he has to attend another United Nations event. So without any further ado, Christian, please, thank you very much for your participation. We pass the floor to you.
Muchísimas gracias, Silvia. Hello.
Thank you, Silvia. Time is short, so I'll try to speak of four important specific things. First of all, point of clarification in terms of the terminologies and the mechanisms, because I know that not all of the organizations or the participants might be acquainted to the universal system of human rights. This is something that is important for us to be on the same page. Then secondly, an idea of the content, where is the content, and the right to housing, where can it be located, and then the human rights approach regarding development on the development policies, and then number four, to both things.
Un enfoque de derechos en las políticas de derechos humanos y en qué medida las políticas públicas son un instrumento para conseguir la realización del derecho a la vivienda y otros derechos.
So to defend the rights to housing and the land, we need to speak about that. That's what we do in the first 25 minutes. Anyway, the first point.
El derecho a la vivienda, el derecho a la vivienda adecuada es un derecho reconocido internacionalmente, está reconocido como parte del derecho a un nivel de vida adecuado.
We all have a right to have, in the Universal Declaration of Rights, the right to have a dignified living. And it is also mentioned in some other international instruments that defend social cultural rights, like the elimination of all racial discrimination, the Convention to eliminate all discrimination against women or against the discrimination of people with disability. Many of the people who participate belong to countries that have ratified and are part of the universal system. But there are other rights connected to the right to housing. So even though the countries may not have ratified, there are some other agreements that are also connected. And let me mention some of them. It's not a complete list. For instance, the right to life, an extensive interpretation of the right to life, which includes the conditions that make dignified living. It includes housing. It is also connected to the right to privacy, the protection of the family, the protection of an address, the private sphere. It is also connected to the instruments that acknowledge the right to owning property and assets. Owning a house is also part of that, even though it's not an individual type of ownership. It is also connected with the protection against inhumane or treatment like forced evictions. It is also connected to the prevention of discrimination in terms of gender or other matters. migrating status, ethnicity, sexual orientation. There's lots of connections to this cross-cutting right not to suffer discrimination in housing. It is also connected to access to justice, effective resources, and due process. This is very relevant in terms of forced evictions. And just to mention a few of them, there are some others that have been developed in the international that are related to the right to housing,
no reconocidos como tales en tratados internacionales, pero ya
that perhaps are not acknowledged in international agreements, but there are international advocacy actions like the land to right, environmental rights, healthy environments, and climate change problems, the right to water, and others. So even though the countries where you are, perhaps they have not ratified the economic, social, cultural agreement that I mentioned, or some others, there are other ways in which we can connect those international agreements to make them enforceable. The two main players in terms of developing the contents of the housing are the Committee of Social Cultural Rights, the United Nations office that supervises the compliance of the International Covenant of those rights, where the right to housing is acknowledged in a more extended way. And secondly, the Commission, now a committee or council, the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, that created the mandate of the Special Rapporteur's Office for the Right of Housing. That long is very long, but you can summarize it like that. It is an entity that is independent, an independent expert that has the power, number one, to write theme reports on the right to housing every year, to visit the countries and ask questions, and also to consider if there are violations, to communicate them to the countries and remind them of their commitments. The fourth mandate is about to be enforced. Almost all of the people who have been rapporteurs were somehow connected to HIC or some other international movements connected to the right to housing. So all of the mandates so far have been strong and very interesting in terms of the development of the content of the right to housing. Amongst the materials that I shared, one that is very interesting is the last report of the previous special rapporteur on the right of housing, Aniar Jarja. It summarizes the perspective of human rights in housing policies, or also the importance of public policies for carrying out the right to housing. And amongst many things we can mention, there are plenty of materials you could refer to that are connected to the reports of special rapporteurs. Aside from the international system, each one of the regions that are represented in this talk have their own regional systems, and in certain cases, regional instruments and mechanisms. The development of the right to housing as a right is something that is new in the regional system, the Inter-American system, the African system, and the one around the Arabic Charter on Human Rights. And none of them acknowledges explicitly the right to housing as such, but it is connected to some other rights that are acknowledged. So there is a connection anyway. And even though there hasn't been a strong work in the development of the right to housing in those systems, there are certain things that have been developed that are important in connection to others, like the Inter-American human rights. Even though there's not been positioning yet, the Commission Inter-American Court of Rights, which are the two entities that protect human rights in the system, they have both developed jurisprudence in terms of subjects connected to forced evictions and displacement, and amendments and repairs that include the right to housing and some other particular considerations in terms of the right to the land of indigenous groups or collective ownership of land that are directly connected to the right to housing. We could expect that this is going to be progressing further in the future, but generally speaking, the most important things about the content to housing
Y en general
from
están
the system, and they are connected to those two, the Committee of Social, Cultural, Economic Rights, and secondly, the special rapporteurs
la vivienda y en general
on the right to housing. And the regional systems have also played a role, the role
por
using this content in the universal
esto también es una invitación a usar los sistemas regionales.
is the way in which we have brought the best of the systems in this matter. Secondly,
Derecho a vivienda, aunque la mención del derecho a vivienda en estos instrumentos que mencioné es muy escueta, dicen cada persona tiene un derecho a un nivel de vida adecuado, incluyendo
it
vivienda.
includes also the right to housing. The development of the content has developed soon enough. So the two documents that I share with you, which is the fourth report of the committee and observation 7 from the social committee as well. They're not new. Observation 4 is the one that explains.
Sorry for the interruption, but we are listening the English interpretation when it's supposed to be listening to Spanish.
Testing,
Sorry,
this is the
my
English
mistake.
channel.
So I'll go back. So about what it means, what's the covenant and the obligations we have on the right of housing. Two things that I shared, the fourth observation of the committee on the seventh observation of the committee. And these observations are not new. 4 comes from 1991 and observation number 7 comes from 1997. So very briefly, important points from journal observation number 4. The first of all is a right to housing does not mean that the state has to give a house to everyone. Sometimes it sounds absurd because that's a utopic right, because it would mean that the state would give a house to everyone, and that's not the content of the house of right of housing. But it doesn't mean that doesn't have any concrete content. And for these, the committee from that general observation developed contents linked to what are some things characterize the rights. The first exercise about this general observation number 4, and that observation, they outlined 7 contents from the right of housing. One is the legal awareness, that is to say, to be, a little bit warranted to have a house, the protection of, against arbitrary evictions, the availability of services, materials, and infrastructure, the habitability and accessibility, economic feasibility, and the 6th is the place, and the cultural equation. We do not have time to talk about all this, but there are some that are linked to the legal condition of the relationship with the housing, and some others that are linked to economical issues, feasibility, and the characteristics, physical characteristics of the house, and others that are linked to the cultural equation, that is to say, the correlation between the house and the cultural environment. And that is linked to a means, and that means has to do with the connection to transportation means, public services, possibility to work, access to cultural goods, etc., etc. So this connects the environment and habit idea, either rural or urban or rural. Housing is not just a building, but there are some other conceptions that link policies of culture, transportation, social services, and so on. Particular development of the committee that came later that we could apply for the general observation number 4, that is that every social and human and economic right has levels of obligation. obligation of respect. That is to say that state, when the person has a certain degree of a right, the state cannot affect that space. So as for housing rights, it's translated in the idea of protection against forced evictions. That is to say, a certain degree of security related to the house. And the second one, an organization of protection, which means to protect the holding of the housing right before the possible infractions coming from other private actors in the market society, where the housing, most of it is given through private actors in a capitalist society. That's a core point that we have to consider, which is the relationship between landlords and people that rent the place. They're not just any contract where you buy or get something, but it has a certain importance due to the fundamental right of right housing. So there must be a particular protection against the, certain violations of a contract, so on and so forth. Second, when it's about buying a house, some banks and financing entities, there is a space for protection related to the financial sector linked to mortgages or the ways to finance housing, and which is a space that requires state regulation and protection against abuse from the stronger to the weaker one. There are some other examples, but I guess these are two that will allow us to understand. In the right of housing might be involved some other private actors as holders or proprietors that rent their house or property in the market, and some financial entities or developers of housing plans. And third, the aspect that has certain positive obligations, the obligation to satisfy the right or warranty the right, which means to facilitate how to enjoy the right and furnish access in the case of people that goes beyond their will and maybe for economical reasons to buy or rent, and also promote the way they enjoy this right. So there are some different aspects on the right housing that we could work differently.
un carácter defensivo, de mantenimiento de una posición ya establecida, ya adquirida, los que están vinculados con las políticas públicas de...
piece of land that has already. I think Mandy does not listen to English. So let's see if we can solve that. There is no translation, Ahmed. Is there any problem with the English? Can everybody help us?
So it is coming through fine at the moment.
Viene bien en este momento. Okay, Mandy says that she doesn't hear.
A ver.
So which channel are you using?
I'm sorry,
Mandy,
I wasn't able to hear the
was
English.
working. Nothing has changed.
No estoy...
She doesn't have a channel. She's in original audio. Please, Jolan.
Do we need to run a test quickly, or perhaps Nadine could just check on the back end that everyone is assigned correctly? That might solve the question at hand.
Okay, so I've got Flo as English and Spanish, and I've also got Elias as English and Spanish. And then we've got 2 on French. I mean, nothing's changed. And Mandy is on English Arabic, so nothing's changed. I don't know what's happened.
Okay, I see it's working now again.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christian.
Bueno, pequeña recapitulación. Así que
there
decía,
are a little
esto significa que hay algunos
summarization. That
aspectos del
means
derecho a
there are
vivienda que
some
tienen
aspects of the
características
right of
principalmente defensivas,
housing that are
particularmente la
defensive,
protección contra el desalojo
particularly
forzoso, y
defension
otras que están
against the
vinculadas más bien
forced
con
evictions, and those that are
regulaciones,
linked
en
to
especial la que tiene que ver con
regulations,
regulaciones de
especially
actores
those
privados que pueden estar
with
involucrados en el
private
acceso
actor
con el disfrute del
regulations
derecho a la
that
vivienda, y
may
otras que tienen que,
affect the right of
ver más bien con
housing
el
to other
desarrollo de
people,
políticas
and
públicas
some
para
others that
la
have to do with the
oferta pública de
development of
vivienda o para la ampliación del
public
acceso a la
policies
vivienda,
to widen the
y
access
estas tienen que ver más bien con
to
la idea de
housing,
satisfacer el derecho a
and
la
that
vivienda,
has to
particularmente para las
do with
personas
the
que no han
idea to
accedido a
satisfying
este
the
derecho.
right of
Así que
housing, so that everyone
ahí
would have
tenemos
the
varias
possibility to have that
componentes. Esto
right.
significa que
So
el
we
derecho a la
have
vivienda es
several
un derecho
parts.
complejo porque
It is
dependiendo
a
de la
complex
situación
right
de
because
disfrute
depending
o de
on the
goce del titular,
situation,
la existencia ya de alguna
the
relación con la
existence
vivienda
of
o el
some
hecho de que se trata
relationship
de
to
una
the
persona que
place,
no tiene
or the
garantizada
fact
la
that there
seguridad
is a
jurídica o
person
no ha
that is not
accedido a la
has
vivienda,
the
se está mezclando
warranty to have the right of
una voz.
housing. We are listening to another
Ahí va.
voice.
Sí, significan
So
posibilidades
that
de
means
incidencia
the possibility
diferentes y
of
en general vinculan
different
actores diferentes, a
advocacy,
veces
and
al
we have
Poder
different
Judicial,
factors
a
that
veces a la
maybe the
Administración, que es
judiciary
en general
or
la
the
que está
administration
encargada de
power, which is in
de la
charge
implementación
of
de
the
políticas públicas en materia
implementation
de
of
vivienda, a
public
veces
policies
a la
regarding
a la
housing.
legislatura, al
Sometimes
Congreso, a la Asamblea, que
the
son los que
Congress or
tienen
the
la
Assembly
obligación de
members that are
adoptar el marco jurídico más
that have to
general en
adapt
relación
the
con
legal
el derecho a la
framework
vivienda.
related to the right of housing.
Y decía, la otra
And I
observación
was
general
saying
importante es la
the
número
other
7 de
observation, number
1997, que es
7
una
in
observación general que
1997,
detalla
which is a
el
general
sentido,
observation
el
that
alcance
talks
de la
about
protección contra los desalojos forzosos.
scope
La observación dice que
of
no
protection
todos los
against
desalojos son
forced
desalojos
eviction.
forzosos, puede haber
It says that
desalojos
not
justificados,
all
pero
evictions are
estos
forced,
tienen que
some are
cumplir una serie
justified,
de
but they have to
requisitos
comply
que
with a
están
certain
relacionados con la idea
series of
de debido
requisites that
proceso
are
y en
linked
particular con
to
la idea de
the
que previamente a
due
decidir un
processing,
desalojo, el Poder
and
Judicial debe
before
considerar
designing
el
an
cumplimiento de las
eviction,
obligaciones de
the
las
law has to
autoridades
consider the
públicas en
fulfillment of the
términos de
obligations of
acceso a vivienda o
public
posibilidades de acceso a vivienda
authorities, have to
y en
comply.
caso de
And in
decretar el
case
desalojo, la consideración de
they
cuáles han sido las medidas para
decree the
posterior
eviction,
realojamiento
they have to talk about
de las personas que van a ser desalojadas.
possibilities of being
Esto
able
dicho
to
de
find a
forma muy
no
resumida, les
harm,
recomiendo leer los materiales porque me
for
parece
the
que dan
people that
un pie
have been
importante
evicted.
para
So
pensar
I
cuáles
think
son
it is
estrategias
important to
de
read all the
incidencia, sean
documentations
jurídicas,
so that we
sean
will
políticas.
be able to see all the advocacy
Segunda cuestión
strategies.
que voy a mencionar es
Second
esta
thing that I
idea
will
de
talk
el
about is the
enfoque
idea
de derechos
of
humanos
the
para las políticas públicas,
approach of
enfoque de
human rights
derechos
for
humanos para las políticas públicas
public
vinculadas
policies
con el desarrollo.
linked to
Esto
development.
proviene, yo diría, de una
This
convergencia
comes
entre
from a
actores que
convergence
provienen
between
del mundo del
actors
desarrollo
that
y
come
actores
from
de
the
derechos humanos.
development
Durante algún
world
tiempo
and
estas dos
human rights
comunidades
world. These
anduvieron como
communities
barcos,
in the
como
past
trenes en
were
paralelo,
like
hasta
parallel
alguna convergencia
trains
tratando de
up
mostrar
until a
cómo
certain
hay
convergence
conexiones entre los
where
dos
there are
discursos.
some connections
La
between
idea
two
de
worlds.
el
The
enfoque de
idea
derechos
of
humanos
the human
destinadas
rights
a las políticas
approach
de desarrollo o las políticas
for the
públicas que están
policies of development or
relacionadas
public
con el
policies
desarrollo,
related to development
pretende traer elementos
try to bring
transversales de la noción de derechos humanos a la forma en la que
elements
se planean, se
human rights on
discuten,
the
se
way
adoptan y se
things
implementan
are
políticas
adopted,
públicas,
discussed,
particularmente
and
aquellas políticas públicas que tienen como
adopted
fin
public
la realización de
policies.
derechos humanos. Así que algunos principios básicos al respecto.
Basic
Primero,
principles
la idea
about
de que
this.
las políticas
First,
de
the idea
desarrollo
that the
deben estar
development
dirigidas
policies
a la
must
realización
be
de derechos humanos
addressed to
y
the
no a su
realization of
frustración.
human
Así que
rights and not their
la política de
frustration.
desarrollo, la
So
política
the
de
development
puro crecimiento económico
policies
sin
of
consideración de las
economic
posibles
growth without
efectos
considering
desigualitarios o
the
los efectos
possible
de
inequity
vulneración
effects
de derechos
or
que tienen esas políticas son
vulnerability of
incompatibles con la
rights
idea
are
de derechos
non-compatible
humanos.
with the idea of human
En
rights.
materia de vivienda no solo son
Regarding
importantes las
housing, they are
políticas
not only
de acceso a
important, those
vivienda, sino
policies of
también las
access to
políticas que están
housing,
relacionadas con
but
el
the
hábitat,
policies
con el medio
related to
ambiente, con el
habitat
transporte,
and
con la gestión de espacios
environment,
públicos y otras. Así que esta idea
transportation,
de
public spaces, so on and so forth.
enfoque de derechos
So
humanos
the idea of the
para
focus of human rights
para las políticas de desarrollo
for
incluyen este abanico de
development policies
otras
include
áreas,
this series
no
of other areas,
estrictamente
not
las áreas vinculadas
only
con
the areas
el
linked
acceso a vivienda.
to
Segunda cuestión,
housing
en
access.
general la
Second
formulación que
question, the
proviene del marco de
formulation that
Naciones
comes
Unidas dice
from
que
the
las
UN
políticas de
frameworks
desarrollo
is
deben
that
estar
development
guiadas por las
policies
normas internacionales de derechos
must
humanos y
be
por las
guided by the
recomendaciones de los
human
mecanismos de
rights
derechos humanos.
and the recommendations of the
Y esto
mechanisms
significa
of
que
human
todo lo que
rights.
dije
And
antes,
that
el
means that
contenido del derecho a la
everything
vivienda,
I
el
said
desarrollo
before,
del derecho a la
the
vivienda y las
development and the right of
recomendaciones que hacen los
housing and the
mecanismos de derechos
recommendations
humanos,
made
la
by the
que
human
tienen
rights
más importancia para
mechanisms,
nosotros
which
son
are most
las que
important
están
to
relacionadas
us,
con
are
lo que
those
ha
linked
dicho el Comité de
to
Derechos
what
Económicos, Sociales y
the
Culturales en
economic,
relación con cada uno de
social,
los países
economical
en el marco
rights
del
committee
diálogo
said
que
in
se
the
establece
framework
cuando los
of
países
the dialogue
envían al
between
comité
countries
sus informes
when
sobre
they
el
sent their
cumplimiento
reports
y
on the
la implementación de las obligaciones
implementation of the
relacionadas con el pacto, así
obligations
que
related
de
to
eso
the
surgen
covenant.
recomendaciones,
So from
conclusiones,
these,
recomendaciones
some
finales que están
conclusions and
dirigidas a
final
contestar y
recommendations
a
that are
discutir los informes
focused on
estatales. Este es un
discussing
espacio en
the
el que pueden
state
participar organizaciones de la
reports,
sociedad
and that's a
civil
space
y
where
un espacio
civil
en el que siempre hay un
society
lugar de
groups
diálogo
can
sobre
participate. And
derecho a la
there's
vivienda y
always
otros
a
derechos
place of
conectados.
dialogue on the right
El
of
Pacto de Derechos Económicos, Sociales y Culturales
housing,
incluye además un
which
protocolo
includes
facultativo
a
que permite la
protocol
presentación de quejas
that
ante el comité por alegadas
allows the
violaciones a
presentation
los
of
derechos del pacto, y ya hay una buena experiencia
allegations
en materia de derecho a
of
vivienda. Hay muchos
violations
casos,
to the
casi todos los casos son contra España, que
treaty.
ratificó el pacto
Most
en
of
un
the
momento de
cases are
crisis de
against
vivienda, así que hay
Spain,
muchos casos que
which
están relacionados con
ratified
desalojos forzosos en
the
relación con la
agreement
situación de crisis
in
y
a
de falta
time
de
of
respuesta
crisis.
de las autoridades públicas en relación con la crisis económica
So
vinculada con la crisis
this
inmobiliaria
economic
en España. Así
crisis
que
linked to the housing
no hay tantos países
crisis.
que han
So
ratificado
there
el
are not
pacto,
many
el
countries that
protocolo
have
facultativo,
ratified this
pero ya hay
facultative
varios países de
protocol,
África,
but there
varios
are
países de
some
América Latina, y
African
esta es
countries,
otra
Latin American
herramienta
countries,
que puede
and this is
utilizarse
another
para
tool that
llevar
can be used
casos vinculados con
to
vivienda
take
a
cases
sede
linked
internacional.
to
Como dije
housing
antes,
to the
uno puede
international
también
arena.
pensar en los mecanismos
So we can
regionales
also think of the
tratando
regional
de vincular
mechanisms
estos
trying
estándares del
to
sistema
link
universal
these standards of the
con los
universal
estándares regionales.
standard with the regional
Y
standards.
próximo punto, ¿cuáles son
Now,
estos
next point,
elementos
which are these
transversales, el
elements
llamado
that
enfoque de derechos
we
humanos en las políticas
call
para el
the human
desarrollo?
right
Yo diría, las principales son, el primero, la idea de igualdad y no discriminación,
approach?
la
The
idea de que las
first one would
políticas
be
públicas deben
equality
considerar en
and
particular
not
situaciones de
discrimination. We have to
vulnerabilidad,
consider
situaciones de desigualdad
vulnerability
material y
situations,
dar prioridad a
material and
grupos
equity
en situación de
situations, and give
vulnerabilidad. Así que este
priority
es un
to
principio cardinal
vulnerable
de las
groups.
políticas públicas de desarrollo.
So this
Las
is
políticas
a
públicas de desarrollo deben estar
paramount point
puestas a disposición
of
de
Christian,
aquellos
I'm
such.
sorry, Christian, to be interrupting you. We just
Perdón
have
por
a challenge
interrumpirte.
with interpretation again. For our Spanish interpreters, can you mute the original audio so we can hear both languages at the same time, Spanish and English? So when you're interpreting, if you could just pay attention to that, that would be fantastic.
So,
so Christian, you are doing everything right.
Okay.
It is
so
just
on my
technical.
on my charts, the language interpretation is off. So what should I do? I shift it to English or to Spanish?
No, I think you are doing everything correct. It is just a setting in the background on the interpretation settings that we just need to pay attention to. Okay. So I think we'll be fine. Thank you so much for your patience on this. And can we perhaps just test it out briefly? If you could speak in Spanish just so we can hear the English audio.
Sí, sí.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Entonces, recapitulando lo que dije sobre
just
el
summing
punto
up
de
of what I
enfoque
said
de
about
derechos humanos
the
en relación
approach
con
on human
políticas de
rights
desarrollo,
related
incluidas las
to
políticas de
development
vivienda y otras
policies,
conexas.
including
Una,
housing
las políticas deben
policies,
estar
and
dirigidas a la realización de
they
los
have to
derechos
be
humanos,
addressed to
incluido
the
el derecho a la
realization of
vivienda.
human rights, including
Segundo, estas políticas deben estar guiadas por las normas
right of
internacionales y
housing,
por
and
las
they have to be
recomendaciones de
guided
mecanismos
by the
internacionales de derechos humanos.
international
Y tercero,
recommendations.
en cuanto a
And
los
third,
principios transversales que definen este enfoque, el
that
primero es el de la
define
igualdad
this,
y la no discriminación y
the first
consideración
one is
prioritaria
the
a grupos en
equality
situación
and
de
priority
vulnerabilidad y de
consideration
desigualdad
of
material.
vulnerable groups.
Estos deben ser los beneficiarios
These must
principales de las
be
políticas
the
públicas.
first
Segundo,
beneficiaries of
la idea de
public policies,
participación
and the
y
idea of
consulta de estos
participation
grupos,
and
es decir, las
consultation
políticas
of these
públicas
groups,
no
that is
pueden
to say,
ser
public policies cannot
planeadas,
be
implementadas
just
de manera puramente
planned
vertical, sino que tienen que
in a
considerar
vertical way, but
en
they
su
have to
formulación,
consider in
en
their
su
formulation
implementación y en su
and
evaluación a los
implementation
destinatarios de
and
esas políticas públicas, y
evaluation
para eso
to
la
the
participación y la
beneficiaries of
consulta de
these
estos grupos es
policies. And
importante.
this is why the participation of these
Tercero,
groups
la
is
idea de
important. Third,
transparencia y
the idea of
publicidad, es decir, la
transparency and
transparencia de los actos,
advertising, the
de las
transparency of
acciones de política
acts of
pública, el
actions of
acceso a la
public
información y la
policy, the
publicidad
access of
de esos actos
to
que definen la política
information,
pública
and the
como forma de
advertising of
discusión
these
pública y
public
como
policies,
forma que permita
on a
la
way of
crítica
public
y la
discussion and
corrección
allowing
de esas políticas
criticism
públicas.
and
Y
correction
cuarto,
of
el elemento de la
these
rendición de
public
cuentas o
policies
accountability, es
and
decir, la existencia de mecanismos
accountability, that
públicos
is
que
to say,
permitan
public
la
mechanisms
crítica,
that would allow
sea entre de
criticism
política, sea a través
either
de
politically
mecanismos
or
de rendición de
through
cuenta individual de los funcionarios
accountability,
cuando hayan
individual
cometido actos
accountability
ilegales, sea a
mechanisms,
través de la rendición de
so
cuentas
that
frente
it
a la
would be
ciudadanía, por ejemplo, a
accountability
través de informes
before
públicos
the citizens
y de
through public
respuestas o
reports and
interpelaciones a los
answers
funcionarios responsables,
to
sea a través de la posibilidad de
some
acceso a
questions,
recursos
either from the
judiciales
possibility
para
of legal resources
controvertir actos
to
u omisiones
fight
alegadamente ilegales de las autoridades públicas.
illegal
Así que estas son
acts from the
algunos de los
public
elementos que
authorities. So these
caracterizan
are some of
el
the
enfoque
elements
de
that
derechos humanos.
characterize the
En el análisis
human
del
right
enfoque de derechos
approach. In
humanos
the
se hace
analysis
un
of
análisis al
human right
respecto de
approach,
la
we have an
titularidad de los
analysis
derechos,
of the
quiénes son los
on the
titulares de los
holding of the
derechos, cuáles
rights,
son
who are the
los
holders of the
responsables
rights,
de
who are the
cumplimientos de derechos,
responsible
quienes están
ones of the
obligados a cumplir estos derechos, y
for
cuáles
the
son los gaps o las brechas de
which
capacidad
are the gaps
por parte de los titulares
on the
en
part of
disfrutar
the
los derechos, por
holders
parte de
in
los
the
obligados en
enjoying the
cumplir con
rights
esas
on the part of
obligaciones.
the
Esto da
obliged to
un poco
comply
el
with these
marco de la
obligations.
metodología
So this
de
is the
este enfoque
framework
de
of the
derechos humanos en
methodology
materia de
of these
políticas públicas.
human right
Y
approach
último punto, la vinculación entre las dos
in
cuestiones.
public policies.
El
And the last
primero y
point,
importante
the
es el derecho a
vinculation
la
between these
vivienda,
two.
es un derecho
The
que es función de
right to
políticas públicas de
housing
vivienda, no se
is
resuelve individualmente.
public
Así que
policies. It cannot be solved
para
individually.
considerar
So in
el
order
derecho
to
a la vivienda en su
consider the
totalidad, y esto
right of
significa considerar todos
housing
esos aspectos que mencioné
completely,
previamente,
which is
son
considering
necesarias
all the
políticas
aspects
públicas, son
that I
necesarias políticas
mentioned
públicas de
before,
mapeo de quienes no
we need
disfrutan derecho a la vivienda,
mapping
por ejemplo, quienes son
public
personas en situación de calle,
policies.
del mapeo de quiénes son quienes no
We
gozan de
have
seguridad
to
en la
map
tenencia,
who
del mapeo de quienes
is
están
not holding a
sujetos a
place,
posibles desalojos por
those that
razones
are maybe
injustificadas
subject
o a veces
to
por razones justificadas, por ejemplo,
unjustified
por razones de
evictions or
desastre
maybe
climático
justified
o algunas
evictions
otras,
due
y en qué
to
medida
some
hay necesidad de reducción de
problems,
riesgo de esos
which
desastres y
is
de
the
respuesta
reduction
rápida.
of risk to disasters,
Hay
for
una
example,
necesidad de
and
consideración
there
de
is a
cuál es
need
el
of
stock de vivienda
consideration of which is the
que está a disposición,
housing
si ese
stock
stock es un stock público o
available,
privado, si hay
either
una brecha en
public
términos
or
de
private
falta
housing,
de
and if there is a
oferta
gap
suficiente de
between
vivienda en
the
relación con la demanda. Así
offer
que la idea de que las
and
políticas públicas deben estar guiadas por
supply and
datos
demand.
está relacionada fuertemente con estas ideas de
So this
transparencia,
is
acceso a la
linked
información
to the
y
ideas of
publicidad. Así que
access to
la
information,
obligación pública de mapear
advertising.
cuál es la situación
So
de
the
disfrute del derecho a la
public
vivienda es un componente importante de cualquier
obligation
política
to
pública
map
y es
all
un espacio de
this.
incidencia importante,
It's a
en
space for
particular de
advocacy,
incidencia crítica de organizaciones de la sociedad,
critical
de sociedad civil que
incidents
puedan
at a
documentar o tener
level
datos
of
al respecto de
civil society that
información
may
errónea o
have
información
some
desactualizada o
data that
información
might
incompleta
not
de las
be
autoridades
updated or
públicas.
not complete from
Segunda
the public
idea, la
authorities. And
instancia
the second
pública de
idea,
discusión de la
the public
política de
instance
vivienda y de otras
for
políticas conexas debe
discussion
ser
of
participativa y debe envolver
housing
en particular
policies, and
aquellos sectores que no
has
disfrutan
to
del derecho a la vivienda. En general, en muchos
consider
de los
the
países en los
sectors
que
that have no
la
right
política
to
de vivienda está relacionada con
house.
intereses
The
inmobiliarios, los
housing
actores
policy
principales de
is
las políticas de
linked
vivienda
to
son los desarrolladores privados de vivienda y
private
no aquellos
developers of
destinatarios de la política de
housing,
vivienda que
and
deberían ser
not the
las personas que no gozan del
beneficiaries
derecho a la
of
vivienda. Así que
housing, that
la
would
idea
be
de
the
una
people that do not
participación
have a house
pública,
now. So
en
the idea
particular
of a
de aquellas
public
personas que
participation,
tienen
particularly
problemas
from
vinculados con
those
el
people
disfrute
that
del derecho
are
a la vivienda, que no acceden plenamente
having
al derecho a la vivienda,
trouble
es sumamente
to
importante, y esto
have
significa
a
la
place
necesidad de
where to
multiplicar las
live,
voces
and
de
that means
aquellos
the
grupos
need
que
to
no están
multiply the
representados
voices of those
a
groups that
través
are
de
not
intereses
represented
corporativos.
through
Esto da un
corporate
espacio muy
interests.
importante a
So this
la idea del
gives
espacio
an
cívico, de las
important
organizaciones
space of the
de la
idea of
sociedad
the
civil
civic
y de otras
space
formas de
and
representación
other
de los
forms of
intereses de esas
representation of
personas, para
interests
traer
of these
algún
people
tema
in order
interesante,
to
por
bring
ejemplo,
an
el
interesting
tema de la
topic,
accesibilidad
like, for
de la
example, the
vivienda pública y del
access
entorno
to
urbano
public
para las
housing
personas
and
con
the
discapacidad,
urban
supone la representación de
environment
esas
for
personas con
disabled
discapacidad en los
people.
debates
So
públicos sobre
it is supposed
regulación
that we
de
have
la
to
vivienda e
listen to these
imposición de obligaciones
people.
a sujetos o
So,
actores privados. Y viceversa,
and
la idea
the other way
de
around,
una política
the
pública
idea of a
guiada
public
por
policy
derechos humanos
guided
supone partir
on
de un
by
diagnóstico al
human
respecto
rights
del grado de goce de
has
los
to
derechos
do the
humanos por
degree
parte de las
of
personas y la,
the possibility
la
of this
destinación de esas políticas públicas a
destination of these
satisfacer
public policies to
esas situaciones.
satisfy
El punto de partida de
this
las
kind of
políticas públicas debería
situation.
ser
So
el
a starting
reconocimiento
point,
de la
public
necesidad
policy
de
has to be the acknowledgement
titularidad por
of the
parte de
need
las
to
personas del derecho a la vivienda y de
holding
medidas que
house
estén destinadas a
from these
facilitar la
people
seguridad, la
and
tenencia
the
y el
measures
acceso a
that
vivienda
will
por parte
help
de esas
these
personas.
people to have access
Esto,
to housing.
el pacto no dice nada y el comité tampoco ha dicho nada
The
al respecto
committee
de
has not
la
said a word about
participación del
the
sector privado
participation of the private sector
este espacio,
in
así que
this
el derecho a la vivienda no
space.
significa
So
necesariamente
the
la
right to
necesidad de
housing does not
políticas
really mean
públicas de
the need of
construcción de vivienda
public
pública y de
policies of
asignación de vivienda pública por parte del Estado. Esta es una opción, pero
building
no es la única,
houses on the part
y
of
países
the
distintos
state.
han adoptado
And different
soluciones
countries
distintas al respecto,
have
que
adopted different
privilegian, por ejemplo,
solutions
la función
regarding
social de la
this
propiedad,
privilege,
la
the
regulación de
social
vivienda no
property
usada,
of land,
el
the
privilegio
reuse
del
of
uso de
non-used
medios
housing,
de
and
acceso a alquiler
giving
en lugar de
ways to
la
having
promoción de la
access to
compra de vivienda,
rent a
que siempre es
place
más cara
rather
y
than
más inaccesible
buying a
para
house
grupos
which
en
is more
situación de
expensive
vulnerabilidad,
and
etcétera,
less
etcétera. Así que
accessible for
detrás de la idea
vulnerable
de que las políticas
groups.
públicas han de
So
realizar el
behind
derecho a
the
la vivienda,
idea
hay
of
un
public
margen de
policies,
apreciación, hay un
there
margen de
is a
decisión que
margin of
permite
appreciation that
acomodar políticas
allows
públicas
to
distintas.
set
Pero todas esas políticas
different
públicas
public
deben cumplir con
policies,
los
but
estándares
all
de
of
derechos humanos, por
those that
ejemplo,
have
con
to
la prohibición de
comply with
desarrollos
the
forzosos, por
human
ejemplo, con
rights, the prevention of
estas
forced
ideas de
evictions, for example, and the
participación,
ideas of
transparencia,
participation,
acceso a la información,
transparency,
con la idea
access to
de la existencia de
information, with the
mecanismos de
idea of
rendición de cuentas en materia de
mechanisms
vivienda
for
que den cuenta del
accountability
panorama
regarding
general del
housing
cumplimiento
that
de
would
este
give a
derecho y de
wide
situaciones de
idea
vulneración particulares de
of
derechos. Por ejemplo,
vulnerability
un tema que ha desarrollado
situations
el primer
for
relator del
human
derecho a la vivienda
rights.
es la posible
So
contradicción o
the
tensión
possible
entre
contradiction
la
between
realización de grandes
the
obras de
realization
infraestructura o
of big
desarrollo,
infrastructure
autopistas, centrales
work
hidroeléctricas, proyectos de
like
minería, con el
hydroelectrical
derecho
or
a la vivienda,
mining
poniendo en
projects.
tensión en particular
So
la
having
prohibición
certain
contra el desalojo
particular
forzoso.
tension,
Aunque
the prevention
esto no
against
significa una
forced
prohibición
eviction.
absoluta de que el Estado adopte medidas vinculadas con
So
grandes obras de infraestructura o desarrollo.
that
Esto no se
doesn't
puede
mean
hacer de
that the
cualquier modo y debe
government does not
respetar
have
el
to
contenido del
care
derecho a la
for
vivienda y esto significa
development
la posibilidad de
work.
consulta previa y
But
participación de
obviously
los
we
grupos
have to have a
afectados,
previous
la
consultation
idea de
of the affected
indemnización
groups
a las
and
personas
the
que puedan ser
idea of
afectadas, la
indemnization
posibilidad
for the
de
affected
presentar
people.
contrapropuestas cuando haya algunas otras
And
alternativas
when
a la
there are some
realización de
other
la obra
alternatives,
que
maybe
sean
have
menos
counter
dañinas en relación
proposals
con el
that
disfrute
would be
del derecho a la vivienda.
less
La
harmful
idea de
for
que
these
aun cuando se
people, the
decida
idea
la
that
necesidad de
even
una
when
obra
they
pública de
decide to
infraestructura que
have
pueda
public
implicar
work
desalojos
that
o
may apply
desplazamientos,
evictions,
esto requiere
these would
previamente la
require
planificación
a
al respecto
previous
de la
planning
reasignación
about the
de una vivienda de similar
reassignation
calidad y con
of a
condiciones
place where
similares,
these
por ejemplo, de
people will
acceso
live
a los
with
lugares de
similar
trabajo para las
conditions,
personas
access
desalojadas,
to the
etcétera,
place of
etcétera.
work
Así
for
que
the evicted
en el
people,
desarrollo
so
de
on and so
políticas
forth.
públicas de
So
vivienda
in the
hay
development of
un
public
componente
policies of
importante
housing,
de
there's an
guía
important
en
part
relación con el
that
contenido del derecho a la
guides
vivienda.
the content of the
Y cierro con
right
un
to
punto que ya,
housing.
que
And I
ya
will finish with
señalaron previamente
something that has
mis
already been
antecesores, que es la idea de que
mentioned,
un espacio
the idea
mayor
that
que
of
el
greater
más estrecho
space than
de los mecanismos de derechos humanos es el de los
human rights
objetivos
mechanisms
de desarrollo
is the
sostenible,
objectives of
que
sustainable
son objetivos no
development
obligatorios, como
that
bien
are
decía Hala, pero
non-obligatory
que han
objectives, as
tenido,
Hala
han
said,
jalado atención
but
política de
that
muchos
have
países.
attracted the
Y
political
si uno mira
attention of
el
many
contenido de la
countries.
Agenda
And if you
2030,
see the
va a ver
content of
que
the
hay
2030
un objetivo
agenda,
específico,
you'll
que es
see
el
there's a
objetivo de
specific
desarrollo
objective,
sostenible
which is
11,
the
que está
sustainable
vinculado directamente
development
con el tema
objective
de
11, which is
ciudades
directly linked
y
to
ciudades y comunidades
the topic
sostenibles.
of
El objetivo habla de lograr que
sustainable
las
and
ciudades sean más
communities that are
inclusivas,
sustainable.
seguras,
It talks
resilientes y
about that
sostenibles. Dentro de ese
places are
objetivo
more
hay
resilient, secure, and sustainable.
algunas
Within
metas,
this
la
objective, there
11.1,
are
por
some
ejemplo, lograr
goals,
que
11.1, for
de
example,
aquí
that
a
to be
2030
able
se
that
asegure el
from
acceso
here
de
to
todas las personas a
2030,
viviendas y servicios
all
básicos
people would
adecuados,
have access
seguros
to
y asequibles y a mejorar los barrios
housing
marginales.
and
El
public
11.2 habla
services.
de proporcionar acceso a
11.2
sistemas de
says
transporte
to
seguros,
give
asequibles,
access to
accesibles
safe
y sostenibles para todos y
transportation
mejorar la seguridad
and
vial.
enhance
Es decir, parte del contenido
the
de estos
security. So
objetivos de
part
desarrollo
of the
sostenible
content of
está
this
inspirado y tiene
sustainable,
que ver directamente, es convergente con obligaciones que
it has to do
decurren
with
del derecho a la
obligations that
vivienda.
come
Así
from
que
the
el
right
espacio de los objetivos de desarrollo
to
sostenible
housing. So the
es un
space of these
espacio
sustainable
propicio para la
spaces
incidencia.
is
Algo
good for
interesante es que el
incidents. Something
propio
interesting is that
contenido de
the actual
la Agenda
content
2030
of
incluye además,
2030
por
agenda
conexión,
includes by
otras
connection
metas y otros
other
objetivos que son
objectives
importantes
that are
para el derecho a la
important
vivienda. Hay
for
ejemplos
the
de esto.
right
El
of
objetivo
housing.
número
There are
5
some
sobre igualdad de la mujer.
examples. Objective number
El
5,
objetivo 1 sobre
equity for
reducción de la pobreza, que
women,
incluye la idea de protección social o piso de
that
protección
includes
social.
protection,
Los
social
objetivos que están
protection
vinculados
floor,
con aspectos
objectives
ambientales y de cambio
linked
climático.
to
El
climate
objetivo
change and
16
environment
sobre
topics,
acceso a la justicia
16
y
access to
servicios públicos y
justice and
autoridades
public services
responsables frente
and
a
responsible
sensibles y responsables
authorities
frente a la ciudadanía. Y además,
before the
el
citizenship.
espíritu general
And the
de
general
la Agenda
spirit
2030
of
subraya esta
Agenda
idea de no dejar a nadie
2030
atrás, que es simplemente
outlines
un eslogan, una
including
forma fácil
everyone, which
de
is a
colocar la idea
simple
de igualdad
way
y no
to
discriminación.
have the
Hay
idea of
algunos grupos
equity,
mencionados
equity and
específicamente, yo diría el
non-discrimination.
género
There are
es
some specific
el
groups
factor
like
mejor transversalizado,
gender
pero
is
se habla también de
the
otros,
best
se habla también de
factor, but we
personas con
also talk about other
discapacidad,
factors
de
like
personas
disabled
adultas mayores,
people,
de niños
elderly
y de otros
people,
grupos, y además
children,
esta
and
idea
other
de no
groups,
dejar nadie atrás
and the
supone que
idea of
cada
not
uno de los
leaving
países debe hacer
everyone,
una
not
prospección
no
al
one
respecto de quiénes son los
behind.
grupos dejados atrás, y esto puede incluir
So
otros
this may
factores como
include
factores
other factors
étnicos,
such as
migración,
ethnic
orientación
factors,
sexual y algunos
migration,
otros. Así que
sexual
el mensaje aquí es
orientation,
la Agenda
so on and so
2030
forth. So the
es
Agenda
compatible con el
2030
lenguaje de los derechos
is
humanos. En general
compatible with
trae algunos de
the
estos
language of
elementos
human
relacionados
rights.
tanto con el
So
contenido
it brings these
sustantivo de
elements
derechos, y esto incluye
related
el derecho a
to
la
the
vivienda, como con
rights
estos aspectos
content,
transversales de los
and
que
it has to
hablaba:
do with these
igualdad, no
transversal aspects
discriminación,
like
participación,
equity,
consulta,
non-discrimination,
acceso a la
participation,
información y
consultation,
rendición de cuentas.
access
Así
to
que también este es un
information, and
espacio de incidencia
accountability. So
importante,
this
y
is an
algunos,
incident
tal vez con
space
algunos
that is
estados sea
important,
más
and
fácil trabajar el
sometimes with
tema
some
a través
states
de
will
esta
be
vía, porque
easier
los
to
estados,
work
como se
through
trata de
these
compromisos más blandos, no obligatorios, los
way.
estados en general lo
So
ven como
in
temas menos
general,
controversiales y hacen un poco
states
propaganda al respecto de su
do some propaganda
participación
about
en
their
el campo de
participation on the
la
field
implementación de
of
los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Así que esta también es
sustainable
una invitación para
development
pensar estratégicamente
objectives.
cómo utilizar espacios que no están vinculados directamente con el espacio de los derechos humanos,
So in the way in
con
which
un
we can
lenguaje
connect this
compatible con
to
este
a
enfoque de derechos
language
humanos,
that is
y me parece
compatible
que
with human rights perspective.
documentar
And I think
situaciones
it's also
nacionales al
about
respecto de
documenting
esto
national
es
situations around
utilizable
this.
tanto en los
This is
espacios, por
something that
ejemplo,
can be used
en
in
los
both the
reportes
spaces
alternativos
of
ante el
alternative
Comité de Derechos Económicos, Sociales y Culturales,
reports
como
to the committee,
en
as
la
well as
incidencia
in
de
terms
sociedad
of
civil en
the
relación
advocacy
con
of
el
civil
cumplimiento
society
de objetivos de
regarding
desarrollo
the
sostenible.
compliance of the Sustainable
Un
Development Goals.
ultimísimo punto
One
vinculado con
last
esta
thing that
perspectiva
is
de derechos.
connected to the
Bueno,
human
en el
rights
mundo de los
perspective.
abogados
In the
siempre
world
se
of
subraya la
lawyers,
importancia de la existencia
they
de
always speak
recursos
about the
judiciales o
importance
del
of
acceso a la
having
justicia
judiciary
como un
tools
componente
or
importante
access
de
to
la idea de
justice
derechos,
tools
y
as an important
países
part of the
distintos del
rule of
mundo han
law.
tenido
And
experiencias
in different
diferentes al
parts of the
respecto de
world,
esta
there have been
cuestión. ¿En qué
different
medida es
experiences around
invocable
this.
el
To
derecho a
one
la vivienda
extent,
u otros
to one
derechos
extent,
conexos de los
is
que
it
hablé antes
possible to use
ante
one
los
of these
tribunales,
resources
y en qué medida
in
los
those
tribunales pueden ser
courts?
un medio para
And
defender
perhaps
ese
those
derecho
courts
tanto en
those
su
trade
aspecto
unions
defensivo, en
could
la protección
be
contra desalojos forzosos,
useful to
como
protect
en el
against
aspecto de
forced evictions,
el
as well
análisis
as
en
in
términos de
the
derechos humanos de la
analysis in terms
compatibilidad de
of
las
human
políticas
rights
públicas
of
adoptadas
the
por el Estado
compatibility
con
of
el
the public
contenido del
policies
derecho a la
adopted
vida.
by the
Así que
state
también esto es
in
una
terms
invitación
of
a
the
pensar
right to
para sus
housing.
propios
So
países
this is
cuál
an
es el
invitation
estado
for
de
you to think
protección del
about
derecho a la
your
vivienda, su
own
reconocimiento
countries. What is
constitucional,
the
la posibilidad de
status?
invocar
Is it acknowledged
instrumentos
by the
internacionales o criterios
constitutions?
internacionales
Can
ante
you
los
use
propios tribunales, la
international
existencia o no de una
instruments
justicia
in your
constitucional,
courts? Is
la
there
posibilidad de invocar
constitutional
estos estándares
justice?
internacionales ante los tribunales ordinarios y en
Can
juicios
ordinary
ordinarios
courts
como
use
forma de
those
pensar estrategias
national and
nacionales para
international
avanzar el derecho a la vivienda,
resources, or
no
what are
solo en
the
el campo de la
strategies you
incidencia
could
política,
think
sino
to
también en el campo de
defend
la
not only in
incidencia
terms of
en el terreno
political
judicial.
advocacy, but also from
Bueno,
the
con
legal
esto
perspective, from a
acabo
legal
la
defense
intervención.
point of
Gracias por
view.
la paciencia y
Thank
perdón
you
por
very
los
much
problemas
for
de
your
traducción y
patience,
quedo
and I
abierto también
apologize for
a
the technical
unos
difficulties.
10,
I
15
am
minutitos
ready
de
for
preguntas
your
y respuestas,
questions.
si lo tienen. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Christian. That was a very broad perspective. It is now time to go into a Q&A. We invite you to be as specific as possible. Don't make comments if you may. It's time to ask questions. And about the last point, Christian coordinated a very important book in Spanish where you will be able to find a general outlook of the different points he spoke in his presentation of all of the social rights that we can facilitate in the classroom, actually, for people who can read in Spanish. Are there any questions? I am trying to find a raised hand in the gallery of pictures of images, but if not, you can use the raising the hand option of Zoom. Sammy, I see that you have raised your hand. Muchas gracias.
I am Sammy from Yemen.
Soy Sammy de Yemen.
Can you hear me? I am Sammy from Yemen. Christian spoke about the right to housing and the right to land and the country's obligations and other obligations. I have a question. What is the situation of the right to land and housing in the cases of conflicts? Because now Yemen is going through forced evictions, especially also for the groups that don't have land or housing. And now, because of the conflicts, there is an escalation of people being forced to leave their homes and the regions, also genocide. What is the what can be done in order to protect the right to housing in this case? This is my question. Thank you.
Tomo varias preguntas y las contesto todas juntas.
Several questions. I'll try to answer them at once. Yes, there's a question. Marie, could you please?
Yes, thank you. I couldn't understand all of it because of this background noise, but I think I think Christian didn't speak specifically to one human rights instrument, which also has a special rapporteur, and I wanted to know whether you see that as an important avenue for us, and that is the right to development. You know, there's also been a call for inputs from that particular rapporteur. And I think the right to development does speak to sort of inequality, the need to, you know, but it's also a collective right. So I wanted to know how you see that being relevant in, say, advocacy strategies around the right to housing. Thank you.
Gracias, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Emmanuel Chungu.
Yeah, I want also to find out in terms of different ideologies of political parties, because in his presentation, Chris says the public policy must be derived from, let me say, from the, like in Zambia, our rights are enshrined in the constitution, but under the Bill of Rights. Now, when it comes to political, in a multi-party political situation, each political party might come with a different ideology towards rights. And like at the moment, we had the Zambian housing policy, which was not completed well for the last 15 years. We have a new government that's also saying it will start again revisiting the same housing policy. So my question is, how do we get help from the regional support in terms of UN systems to maintain a policy that will benefit the people? Because the political might be a capitalist, might be a socialist. So a capitalist will be always looking for profit, or even to displace people in a place where the people are staying for a long time. So my question is, how do we get help, or how do we sustain the fight to ensure that the political ideology does not overrun the people's rights? Thank you.
Bueno, contesto estas.
Perdona, Cristian, me dicen que si puedes.
Cristian, could you make certain that you have the interpretation into Spanish available? Someone is saying, I don't know what they're trying to say this. Perhaps.
It's just to make sure, sorry for coming in, it's just to make sure, yes, Christian, that the Spanish interpretation is activated. That's on your end, so that you are speaking into the Spanish interpretation channel, and that might solve the issue. Otherwise, we will continue. Thank you so much.
Así va bien. A ver si así va bien.
Let's see if this works better. Is it working better? All right, so let me answer to those three things. First of all, thank you for the questions. I didn't speak about this specifically, but aside from the fact that human rights are applicable to war zones and conflict areas, there's another body, humanitarian law, that includes the obligation of the parties, both of the state or other countries in war, to protect civil society, civil population. The right to housing is protected there. Even in the midst of a armed conflict or chaos. So when there's displacement, when there are situations that are connected to uprising or the use of force by the state or some other actors, militia or guerrilla, they are against humanitarian international law. And if applicable, if they are used, in the case of forced displacement, is it used as a, could even consider international crime. So there are things that could be explored in case of conflict. Now, in the situation after a conflict, what happens with people who have been displaced because of a conflict? Are they reintegrated to society? How do they recover their properties, their land, their houses? There's a guideline by the human rights system. Some principles were adopted. They are not compulsory, but the Piñero principles are. The Piñero, who was Paulo Célio Piñero, was a specialist in human rights from Brazil. He was responsible for drafting those principles. So there are certain guidelines that are very clear about the obligations of the states, regardless of the situation, during, before, or after an armed conflict, and especially in connection to remediation, how to help people recover their land or their houses. For those people who've been affected, they have been applied in different parts of the world as a guideline of policies in a situation after a conflict. So, for obvious reasons, because of scarcity or lack of political spaces, the moments of conflict are not moments for the positive part of law to be developed, or rather it's a time to protect or to try to ameliorate the use of force or violence to protect housing, and the parties in conflicts are obliged to protect civil society, civil population, even if there is a damage afterwards. They are entitled to recover their land and their houses according to this humanitarian law. And about the second question, it's very interesting. The right to development is acknowledged in a declaration by the General Assembly of the United Nations, but it's not binding. And even since it was first adopted, it's been controversial because, generally speaking, it's a right that is applied by developing nations, but the developed nations opposed to it. So the task force on the right to development is a place that has not been fruitful because there's been political blockages. Now, from the conceptual perspective, the idea is beautiful, but in reality, in practice, little has been done because there are so many interests at hand that people don't let anything go by. So the right to development, the contents are in the agenda, the 2030 agenda. There's a convergence of the content in the right to development with the different substantial and procedural aspects of the 2030 agenda. So without going to great detail, this space should be preserved, the right to development. Hopefully it'll be better used, but the spaces for monitoring the right to development, they have little margin of effectiveness. You could use the same type of lines of argumentation for 2030, and perhaps that's more powerful. So I think that's the best choice you have. That is a suggestion, a political suggestion, by facing the realities of what has happened with the attempts of having mechanisms that are more, that are stronger to monitor the right to development. That has not been productive. Now, the third question. Regardless of the political ideology of the party, the human rights obligations, they don't change. You cannot choose to comply them or not. The Bill of Rights, the international obligations, they should guide public policies regardless of the party. It does not mean that the rights don't let you freedom to think about different public policies. Some of them could be more market-oriented, some others could be more public action-oriented. That's part of democracy, to reach an agreement on how to do things. But once a political party is violating the minimum standards of international law, this is a situation of blatant violation. So what are the national mechanisms that you can use to try to draw the attention to the debate? The first thing is to document why is a public policy going against rights, and then look at the international arena, both in the African human rights system as well as the universal system. There's the possibility of bringing cases connected to public policies to those courts. By presenting shadow or alternative reports, you can document to the extent in which public policies are not complying or violating a right. And for this, you need to have a very good documentation strategy. It's based on hard data. The better statistics, the better evidence you have, the better the chance you will have to get somewhere. So the idea of bringing the attention to the international arena is because you can use that to open the dialogue with the public authorities in your country. So Emmanuel, so the first homework you have is to go to document why public policies are insufficient or going against human rights for the vulnerable populations, and why they go against the principle of equality. What are the important points that you should raise? Because there's a lack of consultation or lack of transparency, lack of participation regarding public policies. So I guess that's a good starting point for you. Good luck. Thank you, Christian. Here's a question from analyst, and we don't have much time to continue with the next presenter. if you had a chance of answering something on the chat, we would appreciate it. Annalisa Menendez, please answer to her on the chat. Thank you very much for your participation. For HIC, it's been very valuable that you have accepted the invite to be here today. And good luck with your event afterwards. And thank you once again. Thank you for the patience. And I hope that this is not the last time we meet.
Now the floor is for Hala.
مرحبا جميعا أعود لكم.
Hello everyone, I return to you using the Arabic language now. Now we move to the second part after thanking Sylvia, who moderated the previous session, and with Christian, it was a very rich session indeed, where we listened about the principles and the mechanisms that we can use. We remind you all that much of what Christian said is available on the Google Classroom, where you can also review the material, which will be very useful. Now we will move to the second session, which I have been waiting for eagerly in order to welcome together the other speaker, who is Mr. Wissam Ahmed. He is one of the members of the Al-HIC Center. It is an organization that focuses on Palestinian rights. It's on the Palestinian territories, and we return to the Arab region, in the Middle East and North Africa region, to take you now on another trip on advocacy having to do with human rights through Mr. Wissam, who is a Palestinian who was born in America, and he is committed to working for the Palestine issue. He has a PhD in law. He continued his master's from the Ireland University. He is now working as a human rights defender in Al-HIC organization since 2006. He focuses on commercial work, human rights, as well as the role of companies and economic institutions that perpetuate the occupation of Palestine. We know that Palestine is now suffering from an occupation of land and resources. There is a lot of injustice. Now we will listen to Mr. Wissam to talk to us more, to tell us more about the human rights-based approach and how Al-HIC organization, as an organization in our region that defends Palestinian rights for house and land. Mr. Wissam, we are eagerly looking forward to listen to you. I know you will speak in English, but we will run this session in Arabic. The moderation will be in Arabic, because we moderate our sessions in 5 different languages. We give you the floor. Thank you very much, Hala.
Would like to say hola che to Christian. Mucho gusto. Hace mucho tiempo estudié el castellano.
Long ago, I studied Spanish in Argentina, so I know lots of Argentinian terms. I hope we can have a chat, you and I, in the future.
Take advantage of any opportunity to practice my Spanish, where I developed the understanding of it in Argentina, and spent a good bit of time there. A beautiful country. But now I am in Palestine, and I've been here since 2006. And I think my presentation provides a good segue from the previous discussions and the questions that were raised with regard to the issue of conflict situations and how we address advocacy issues that have the intersection of international humanitarian law and human rights law. But also we have the issue of the bigger challenges about what we mean by sustainable development. Are we sustaining the status quo, or are we trying to challenge it? And I think this is a bigger question for all of us as human rights advocates to keep in mind as we do the work that we are contributing to a broader change. And so my presentation will focus on how we try to achieve that change using some specific examples. And I did a PowerPoint presentation, which if I can share the screen, I can put up. Okay, thank you.
Please try to, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
And so my presentation is titled Human Rights Advocacy in a Complex Adaptive Social System. One of the questions also that was raised previously was how do we address the political spectrum, the economic, the ideological, and this for me is very important to keep in mind that how we see those things interact as we do our human rights advocacy work. And for those that you've probably already seen the background with regard to Al-HIC, and I got my Arabic is heavy. عربياتي ثقيل زي ما بقولوا. بس there are the word Al-HIC can mean the right, and that I think is probably the more appropriate direct translation, but also the truth in the pursuit of truth, and that's something that Al-HIC has been working on. Using the tools of international law over the years as a way to challenge the occupation through the mechanisms that exist. And these are the tools that have been designated by the international community for us to realize our right to self-determination. And over the time, we have refined our ability to use these tools and challenge the Israeli narrative, challenge the economic incentive structure that perpetuates the occupation. And part of our ability to refine these tools has recently put us in a situation where we have been designated by the Israeli occupying power as a terrorist organization for the work that we are doing. And we see this as a confirmation of the value of the work and the importance of it, and we will continue to push forward accordingly. Now, the human rights work that we do, for me, I feel like the most important thing we keep in mind is the information that we are gathering, the tools that we are using. When we are advocating, we are trying to achieve a particular change. So we are educating people with purpose to get them to take a specific action. And that's where I think the recent discussions about solidarity being a verb are very relevant. Now, my presentation looks at 5 things that you need to keep in mind in order to realize the rights that you're trying to achieve. First, understanding the rights you want to see realized, understanding the obstacles to that realization, understand the relationship between yourself and those obstacles, and developing a strategy to overcome those obstacles, and then implementing that strategy. Now, this is where a lot of our human rights work starts. It's educating ourselves, doing research, gathering information, part of the immersive experience of being on the ground in the community, collecting information directly is very important. But also the ability to empathize plays an important role in conveying the message that you want to others, because you need people not only to sympathize, to feel sorry for what is happening, you also want to connect what is happening to you to them. They need to empathize, they need to connect with what you are trying to put forward. And the most important thing is passion. If not only do we need to be passionate about the work that we are doing, but if we want to effect change, it's very important to try to get people passionate about the issue, to care much more than simply out of interest of understanding the issue, but actually wanting to do something about it. Now, in order to understand the obstacles to the realization of rights, whether it's human rights law, international humanitarian law, the obligations that states have in international law, when you get down into the practical implementation, you see how weak that obligation becomes. And a great example of that is the Common Article 1 of the Fourth Geneva Convention that states that states have to ensure compliance with international humanitarian law. And when we talk about those states' responsibility to ensure compliance and their duties of not recognizing illegal activity, their interpretation takes a broad spectrum of what it means to act to ensure compliance. Simply issuing a statement of concern, condemnation, or actually taking proactive steps to ban particular activities, to issue sanctions. And the reality is we have very recently seen what it means of action on an international scale when there's a political will to do so with the situation in Ukraine. But as Palestinians, we ask ourselves as well, where has the action been with regard to Palestine? And obviously we can continue to ask ourselves why, or we can move forward more proactively to change that dynamics and challenge those obstacles and those constraints. And part of that is addressing this issue of political will and the lack thereof in addressing the situation in Palestine specifically, but even in more general terms, a lot of the justifications I've heard over my years working with HIC in the area of human rights is we've done what we can, there's a lack of political will. But the issue of political will, what does it mean, is very important in understanding and developing a stronger strategy of addressing these obstacles. And that's why those obstacles force us, they should force us to challenge them and see them as an opportunity to demystify political will. And I have a quote here: the impediment to action advances action, and what stands in the way becomes the way. And I really feel like we can either use the obstacles as an excuse to limit where we can go, or look at those obstacles as an opportunity to develop more innovative approaches to challenge those obstacles. And in order to understand the relationship within our system and yourself within that system in relation to the obstacles, in relation to the rights you're trying to achieve, I've found that it's important to see the system we operate in a complex view, rather than what's known as a complicated view, where things are very much linear in sequence and connect through a specific pattern. The reality is the dynamics of ourselves, our institutions, the different actors is a much more complex system that interacts in many different ways. And we have to see those interactions and better understand where those dynamics lie in terms of agents and actors, and how change in one part of the system may not necessarily lead to a direct impact on the next component of the system, but over time it could have what is known as the butterfly effect or a ripple effect within the system as a whole. And in order to go into more detail about what I mean about this complex adaptive social system, first of all, it has the components of being complex, that it has more than three, it's not a binary relationship. of diverse specialized agents or components interacting with each other and their environment. It's adaptive, that it has the capacity to change under influence, feedback, or memory, and evolve. And so in our work, what we are trying to do is affect change. And so our faith and our hope in doing this human rights work is all about the possibility of change. If we don't believe that change is possible, why are we doing this work? But appreciating that change will not happen magically, and it won't be going from a situation that we don't want to the situation we want. It is a much broader process of time over. I have been made the host. I think, I don't know if others are able to let in those that are joining the waiting room, so I don't have to. But yeah.
Yes, we'll manage it. Thank you.
Okay. And the other component, and I think this is really, for me, one of the most important elements, and is understanding that we aren't any system. We are a social system, and human beings are the primary agents within a social system. So thinking about human psychology and behavior and human nature and what motivates us, what drives us to act in a particular way, what leads us to avoid a particular action within whether it's our individual society and the community, our institution, at a much broader level in a state, for example. And the social system has three main components: the political component, the economic component, and the cultural component. But they are not mutually exclusive. They are very much interconnected. And for me, I see human rights institutions very much fitting within the cultural sphere, primarily trying to influence the political sphere, and having that interaction. Initially in the work of HIC, I feel much of the work was between the cultural sphere and the political sphere, where we as a human rights institution pushed the political actors to act based on what we called their obligations under international law that required them to act. But this kind of dynamic of a linear relationship where we ask and provide the justification for action didn't lead to the action we needed on the political level. And so over time, our work has expanded to more broadly encompass the economic component and address the relationship between economics and politics and how those dynamics influence the work that we are trying to achieve, and push those issues forward in a much more dynamic manner. Now, the example I wanted to provide, so it doesn't seem like I'm just speaking abstract and in theory, is the issue with regard to the UN database on business involvement in the Israeli settlement enterprise in occupied Palestinian territory. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with the UN database on business involvement in the settlements, it is a product of many years of work that aim to highlight the economic dimensions that contribute to the occupation and its perpetuation. And then we were able to secure a resolution through our advocacy work that created a database, or the resolution asked for the creation of such a database. And again, the work doesn't stop with the passing of a resolution that asked for the creation of a database. We needed to continue to push for that database to be made public and reflected within the UN system. And that took a couple of years more than we expected, but eventually the first report came out listing about 112 companies. And that was what we would refer to in our line of work a relative success, because we got the database, we had companies listed, and that created quite a bit of uproar within the international community. But then we ran into another challenge of updating the database, because the resolution that was passed for the creation of the database also called for this database to be updated annually. Now, the Office of the High Commissioner was very hesitant in updating the database on an annual basis, and that became the new obstacle that we were faced with, not simply having the initial database released and that report, but how to push that database to be updated on an annual basis. And so that led us to develop our better understanding of the dynamics between the Office of the High Commissioner, the Human Rights Council, the member states within the Human Rights Council, and ourselves, and how we can push that issue forward. And so the main argument that was put forward initially by the Office of the High Commissioner, that it didn't see the mandate that was initially created as providing enough clarity for how the database would be updated, and seemed to want to step aside and let the additional mechanisms develop for that purpose. And so what we did to try to challenge that, because the argument to the Office of the High Commissioner is you need to update the database. The Office of the High Commissioner was unable to update in its opinion. And so their argument was the mandate had been fulfilled with the release of the initial report. And the challenge we faced was the easier solution would be to have a new resolution that clarified the need for this report to be updated and ensuring the financial resources are available within a separate resolution. Now, if you're familiar with the process of how UN resolutions in the Human Rights Council pass through these votes, there was a risk if we try to put forward a new resolution, we can't guarantee that it will pass. And we didn't want the database to be stillborn and that's it, and left as it was. But at the same time, we didn't want the issue to simply be an argument between us and the Office of the High Commissioner on how this should be interpreted. So through our analysis of the dynamics of where the states can play a role in supporting our interpretation that the mandate was clear enough and an annual update was required, what we did was suggest to states during the welcoming of the report to also express in their own oral interventions an expectation for an annual update based on the existing resolution. And so by getting friendly states to put forward, in their words, their interpretation that they expect an annual update, created an additional pressure on the Office of the High Commissioner to address the expectations of states, not simply the expectations of civil society. And so we were able to engage within that system in a more dynamic manner. And now we see the Office of the High Commissioner sort of accepting the need for the annual update and accepting that its mandate requires it. But now the argument has shifted to a lack of financial resources necessary for the updates. And so our struggle continues to try to address this particular issue as well. What I want to do in addition to this example is share a couple of additional examples which I didn't have in the presentation, but if you bear with me, I want to just highlight a couple of other issues. One is the after we were labeled terrorist organizations, we connected this move to the discovery of Pegasus spyware on one of our colleagues' phones. And then it became clear that Pegasus spyware was used on many Palestinian civil society actors. And we saw that the issue of the Pegasus spyware as not only a problematic in and of itself, but also how the issue of the research and development and cooperation with the EU on the issue of the Horizon agreement between the EU and Israel, how this issue can be challenged and put forward an argument and ask states to open an inquiry into how the relationship between the EU Horizon Agreement may have contributed directly or indirectly to the development of such technology, because that technology is not only problematic for Palestinians, it is also exported abroad. And it is part of the broader economic incentive structure that feeds into Israel's occupation, allowing it to use a captive population to develop such technology and export it abroad. And we thought that this would be an opportunity to explore how that research cooperation between the EU and Israel would go forward. But we didn't see much traction in that in terms of our specific ask. But what we did see is that ask being used by friendly parliamentarians in a different way. And I'll tell you how it was used. Because in the different system of the European Parliament, there are allies and there are adversaries, and those that want to even go further against the Palestinian organizations. And it came to our attention that one of the arguments that was being put forward by more adversarial actors was they wanted to bring in the European Court of Auditors to audit all the Palestinian civil society organizations and how they are engaged with EU funding and partner funding, and trying to add additional burdens upon us and make the life of Palestinian civil society much more difficult and contribute to greater shrinking space. And what we heard is that some of the more friendly parliamentarians countered that move with an argument that if this goes forward, then we will put forward that the Court of Auditors should do an audit of the Horizon Agreement and how it contributes to the development of Israeli technology. And so this is an example of how our argument for a specific ask wasn't met directly, but it entered the system. It became part of the consciousness of the possibilities of action and was used in a way that we didn't expect to be used. But by engaging with the system in a broader sense, it allowed it to be used in a different way. And so this is an additional example that I wanted to put forward just to give you more tangible examples of how the work needs to be kept in mind, that it isn't a linear relationship between what we want and the change taking place. It is a much more complex system that could take place over time by different actors that you didn't necessarily expect to act in a particular way at a particular time. So I'll stop there with my presentation and leave the floor open for additional questions. I hope I didn't bore you or confuse you. I'll leave you with one additional quote that builds on the previous one I showed with regard to the obstacle becoming the path, and how our actions may be impeded, but there can be no impeding our intentions or dispossessions, because we can accommodate and adapt. The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. Thank you.
شكرا أستاذ وسام على هذا العرض. أعتقد أن التدخلات.
Thank you, Mr. Wissam. I believe that the interventions, economic, ideological, or economic or political, is in the core of our work. We can talk about the right to resources and land, but we have to have an idea about the economic resources and their relationship with public rights. I believe that the presentation you gave was very good to draw the line, a clear line, how things go inside the organization, HIC organization, and how we can take this as a general approach. I leave the space now. If there is any comment or question on part of the participants, please raise your hands to participate, or if you have questions, you can write them on the chat. This can be beneficial, Aidan. And how can we, if there are any questions or intervention on part of the participants, or even on part of my colleagues, the facilitators, Emmanuel, Enrique, and any of you also can give us an intervention about the approaches that Wissam talked about.
I see Emmanuel has his hand raised.
نعم أنا فقط أنتظر لانتهاء الترجمة لأننا
I'm just awaiting the end of the translation. I'm just making sure that everybody hears. Emmanuel, go ahead. You have the floor, but please try to make it short.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ara and the presenter. My just comment is just going to the well-defined strategy that they use in their advocacy. Now, I just want to be happy, or to show my happiness that when we talk about rights, sometimes we do forget about the economic rights. And this economic rights comes, like in Africa, with the coming of investors. Some investors do not take the interest of what the benefit or what the society will benefit, especially the citizen of the country. Now, I've said so because the approach was started with the database. And when I look at the number of interventions that have been happening in Africa, in Zambia, in my country in particular, database is nowhere to be seen. So without the database, I don't see you can do anything. So it is something that I've learned, that for us to do something, we need the database, which will give us an information to design a strategy and an action that will be appropriate. I thank you.
Thank you.
شكرا إيمانويل.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for this intervention. The database is really important, and I believe that HIC, Mr. Wissam was talking about the direct relation with the information that they obtain directly from the people and the interaction with people. Mr. Wissam, do you have any comment on what Emmanuel just said?
Yeah, information is power, and our pursuit of information contributes to our understanding of the situation, contributes to our pursuit of truth and the change that we want to see. And within our context, the Palestinian context, we are operating within the limited capacity of Palestinian governmental apparatus under occupation. And so the database serves as an international tool that comes in to this asymmetrical power relationship, providing information at an international level. The question that you raise, Emmanuel, is one that leads to a bigger question of why independent countries that are not under occupation do not have this information readily available. And my intuition is that the information is available, but it's not available to everyone. And so you don't have all the information that is required to be able to question and inquire into governmental contracts with multinational corporations. And this connects to where the work we are doing in Palestine to the broader sort of global injustices of multinational corporate activity contributing to undermining human rights, all forms of human rights, but specifically economic rights. And this is very much part of the legacy of colonialism, and the way that multinational corporations have evolved in their work to continue to exploit and extract natural resources from the global south for the benefit of the global north and multinational corporations particularly, and making it more difficult to continue the process of decolonization and the realization of rights on a holistic level, specifically economic rights that are measurable rights that you're able to see how the development of the people within a society are benefiting, but that's part. It shows why the Palestinian issue is very much a microcosm of global injustice, and we refer to Israel's occupation as a best business practice of colonialism, because it has taken the historical legacy of colonialism and refined it and improved upon it to make occupation a much more profitable venture in the 21st century.
نعم، لا يمكن أن نصف الاحتلال إلا بأنه
We can only describe the occupation as the worst rights depriving practices. And today we see many of the people who are deprived of their rights under occupation, and the Palestinian people is one of the examples that is very clear to those who have been following it for more than 70 years. It is a rights cause. It may not have been the wars that the Palestinian people went through, but today this occupation is practicing its non-rights actions that take away from the Palestinian people their rights, their land, their security, and their lives. So this is an icon for struggle and rights work for advocacy. I just wanted to ask if there is any final intervention for this session before we give the microphone to my colleague Areli, who will end this session, and she will give you the following steps for this session, because we are on the second session. We have two following sessions to be together in these co-learning spaces on multi-level advocacy, in order for us not to take too long and to finish on time.
I see that we have a comment in the chat, which I'm sure is just being translated. Perhaps we could just refer to that.
بالإسبانية فأنا لا أستطيع أن yes. صحيح. هنا نتحدث عن نوع
This is true. Here we are talking about another type of rights, which is the right to obtain information. I believe that one of the most important issues that can be raised in our talk about rights is the mechanism of obtaining information and the fair and rights guarantees to obtain information. Wissam, in a minute, can we comment on this, the right to information and the mechanisms that guarantee it in our region, if there are any mechanisms that can guarantee this?
Without the information, and that's part of the challenge of getting the right information, and the powers that benefit from the status quo naturally make it more difficult to have the necessary information. And this is part of the broader challenge within the system of securing the information in order to be able to act upon it. And that also requires us to find more creative ways to find that information because it won't be given easily. But our work isn't. That's why we do it, right?
No.
Yes. I believe this is also among the tasks that we need to advocate for. To a great extent, for example, in our countries, there are laws about it, but the regulations through which information is obtained are bureaucratic and complex that need other guarantees and in order to enforce them. We conclude this session with this. We have 3 minutes before the end of this session. Now we listen to Areli, who will lead us to the coming steps. We give you the floor, Areli. Thank you all. I enjoyed a lot during this session. Thank you, Mr. Wissam. We will definitely keep in touch for coming steps and continuous work. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward. We will be happy to cooperate with you in the future.
Keep up the great work.
Muchas gracias. Voy a hablar en
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak in Spanish. In these last minutes before we say goodbye, we want to tell you that we are going to send you by mail the instructions for an activity, for an asynchronic activity, which means you will be able to do it after the session. And we kindly ask you to answer a series of questions through an app which is called AHA Slides, which is an online app that you will be getting the link in your email, and you'll find the instructions too in the Google Classroom. Here, Nadine is showing us this and what you're going to see when you log into this link. And we're going to ask you to answer 3 very simple questions. These questions that we ask you to answer before next session, that is to say, by Monday, the latest, next Monday, the latest, you have to tell us the name of your country and the kind of legal dispositions that are available in your countries in order to use them in strategies for advocacy for human rights. You're going to tell us whether the human rights are properly acknowledged in your constitution or federal laws or local laws, or international human rights instruments that your country has ratified. A short answer. A second question will be about if you are aware of, in your community, country, or region, of an advocacy campaign or strategy using human rights. If you're aware of these strategy or advocacy campaign for human rights, please name it or give us the objective of such campaign. And a third question is to identify an obstacle or challenge that you may see in your community, country, or region in order to implement advocacy in strategies for human rights. These 3 questions will be received by you in your emails. They're going to be in the 4 languages for HIC, English, Spanish, French, and Arabic. Instructions will be clear in classroom and the link to the online tool. The idea is that everyone will be able to participate in their language, and facilitators will systematize the answers, and in next session we'll show a summary of this feedback by region that we have requested. Lastly, Nadine will show us now, just for those that are not aware about Classroom, how Google Classroom looks like, and you may recognize the sections there, where there is a section for materials of the previous activities. And with this, we will conclude after Nadine shows us these very briefly.
Hi everyone. Just a 1 minute fly through of the classroom.
Darles rápido una revisión sobre
So
Classroom.
this first page here is
Aquí en
essentially
esta
the
primera
stream.
página es
This is
Sorry,
a page
Nadine, if
where
I could, sorry, Nadine, we are just hearing
Yes.
Spanish interpretation on the English channel. If you could just give us a moment. I think we are, yeah. I think we should be sorted. Let's just try it again.
okay, I'm gonna go. Is the interpretation working correctly now?
Yes, all good.
Okay. So the stream of the Google Classrooms is essentially where you as participants have freedom to raise issues and have conversations that you would like to. So you simply click in here and you can post a comment or a question to your classmates or anyone in the classroom. I will also copy all of our emails and correspondence in here. You can see this is the question that Aurelie just posed to you. You can find the link to that quiz on the stream. In our classwork section at the top, that's where everything is saved. So you can see here in session 1, the Zoom link, the session outline, the preparation materials, the library, which is all of the documents mentioned in the first session. You can find the recordings from the first session and all the materials that were presented in the first session. There's also a space for feedback and comments here, so please give us your feedback on things that you would like to hear. This link will stay there permanently, so you can access it at any time. And in session 2, I will also leave the recordings and all of the content from this session there for you to find. And I will carry on doing that for session 3 and 4. Please contact us at learning@hicnet.org. I will, maybe one of my colleagues can post that email in the chat. And if you have any problems accessing Google Classroom, please let us know. And I'll happily help you access this classroom. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Nadine. Entonces, pues
Thank you,
solamente-
Nadine. So just to wrap it up and to say goodbye, Hala, would you like to say a few words to conclude?
Thank you, Aurelie. I just wanted to say that the session's objective was to build together a vision of the human rights approach in addressing multi-level advocacy. We wanted through these sessions, these 2 sessions, to talk about the issue having to do with human rights mechanisms and to give a real application. I hope that we were able, one way or another, to achieve these objectives, and we hope that there is real participation through the Google Classroom, because this also tells us what we need to do in the future and how we can organize our efforts together. Thank you once again. I would like to listen always to a concluding word from Yolanda. Can you give us a last word for this session? Thank you.
Yeah, I think really just to say thank you to you all. I've seen in the chat lots of comments. I know we are on a journey together, and at times the journey becomes clearer and clearer as we progress through the sessions. So have a look at the materials, and we ask you also to really follow us through the different sessions. You will see that they weave together, and we will be looking next week at the sustainable development system, and then in our last session really looking at advocacy ready for practice. What does it mean very practically in your context? How is it a very accessible, grounded thing that we can each do in the various spheres that we work and live in? So thanks very much for your time, and see you next week, Wednesday.
Gracias, saludos.
Hola,
Annalise.
Hola.
Gracias.
Gracias.
¿Cómo estás? Qué gusto
شكراً
verte,
لكم.
María.
Hola, Enrique. ¿Cómo
Hola,
están?
querida Marina.
¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo
Un
andan?
gusto.
¿Cuándo vienen por Argentina, chicos?
Ay, no
She's
sé.
inviting you guys to Argentina. Well, with the pandemic, you cannot tell.
Pero espero que pronto, Argentina, Bolivia, muchos
Bolivia,
países.
Bolivia, Enrique, vente,
Do
vente.
come to Bolivia, please. We are high enough for it to be cold and nice. But you have to come